Can you, is it all okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks for that introduction.
Cheers.
Very flattering, more than I deserve. But yes, welcome all. Welcome everyone from Bangor. Welcome everyone from Wales. Welcome everyone who's here who's from somewhere else that isn't Wales. Bolivia is only a 4-hour drive from where I'm sitting. It's one of my closest other countries to get to, Brazil being the other one. But I spent a lot of time in Bolivia, and I just want to try and give you a bit of a flavor about it. And there'll be a bit to go before we move on to the birds. But okay, as you can see from this slide, the Republic of Bolivia, actually in Spanish, is called the Estado Pluirnacional de Bolivia. Now, the reason for that is that there are 36 indigenous groups with 36 different languages, apart from Spanish, that inhabit Bolivia. So it was decided by the Bolivian government that they would call their country plurinational to reflect the ethnicism of the people that are there. About, let's see, we have some figures somewhere. About 60% of the population are mestizo. What does mestizo mean? It means a mix of Spanish blood and indigenous Andean blood. It's got the highest indigenous Indian population. I think Indian is a politically non-correct word these days, but indigenous population in the whole of the Americas. It's one of 2 landlocked countries in South America, the other one being Paraguay, which is by pure chance the only South American country I've not visited, and I would like to go there at some point. It has an incredible diversity of birds, Bolivia. As you can see from this map, it is landlocked. It has no access to the sea. Its access to the sea was taken away from it during the Pacific War in the late 1800s, which involved a war between Bolivia, Chile, and Peru, and Chile won. And Bolivia maintains that it should have access to the sea, and even maintains a local navy on Lake Titicaca. So I'm just going to move something over here. Before the pandemic, which you may remember, Bolivia got about 1 million tourists a year. I'm not talking about bird tourists, I'm talking about tourists in general, compared to neighbouring Peru's 4.5 million. That has plummeted in both countries, but Bolivia remains one of the least known birding destinations in South America. The others probably being Paraguay and French Guyana. When everyone thinks of Bolivia, the first thing that comes to mind for most people who know a little bit about Bolivia is Lake Titicaca, which is a huge lake, which is shared between the international boundary between Peru and Bolivia runs through it. And it's, you can see the statistics there below. It's at 3,800 meters, and it's very, very big. And it's host to this little cute guy, the Titicaca grebe. It cannot fly, so it's not going to expand its range anytime soon. There's been issues with conservation, with raw sewage from the towns around the lake and mining going into the lake and causing declining populations. Fortunately, conservation efforts to clean the waters up are working well, and it's got a healthy population. It's a bird you can see in Bolivia, or you can see it in Peru as well. Talking about the ethnicity of Bolivia, it's really split into two bits. It's split into the highlands, which are very high, going up some of the highest peaks are over 7,000 meters, and the lowlands. This is a photo taken in what is the political capital, Nuestra Señora de la Paz, which everyone just calls La Paz, but its official name is Nuestra Señora de la Paz, Our Lady of the Peace. But everyone calls it La Paz. and that is typical dress. If you go there and walk down the streets, apart from seeing tourists, you will see people dressed like that. And then you have the lowlands, which are mostly tropical savanna and rainforest. Now, the northeastern part of Bolivia, which has huge tracts of rainforest, is very little explored. One of the reasons is difficulty of access. Another reason is that the Amazon rainforest is pretty unanimous in its bird populations. So just over the border in easily accessible parts of Peru or Brazil, you can see the same species. So the Bolivian rainforest is very seldom visited. I've only been there on a couple of occasions, and it's quite difficult traveling. The other lowlands are tropical savanna, and the capital of the tropical savanna is Santa Cruz de la Sierra, which is in close to the Brazilian and Paraguayan borders. And you can see from that street scene, it's very, very different from what I just showed you up in the Andes. So that's why this is a plurinational nation, because it has many, many different ethnic groups and many ways that people live. In the highlands, they live more like Andean people, indigenous people. Down here in Santa Cruz, what you're looking at right now, it's more like being in Brazil or Argentina. It's got a rich culture, particularly for music and dancing. This is a Bolivian dance troupe. You can see these on many occasions. There are many feast days. It's a Catholic country, basically. So any feast day, any saint's day is an excuse to go out and have fun on the streets. And one of the main dances that the men dance is the Diablada dance, dance of the devil. But Bolivia has exported itself to all over the world. This musicians can be found in many capitals, New York, Los Angeles, and not forgetting London. This is the San Simon dance group in London, and they dance at the Notting Hill Festival. Most of them are Bolivians, expat Bolivians who live in the Bolivian community in Lima. But one of them, proud dad moment, is the girl at the back, the white girl. She is Peruvian, and she dances on the Notting Hill Festival with this dance group. So it's good to see that that Bolivia is really showing its face and not ashamed to do so in other parts of the world. Now, here we go, food. Now, this can be a bit of an issue in Bolivia. Bolivia is not known for being a gourmet nation. You can see there that it's pretty basic stuff that they use to make food. One of the good things is that the German immigration brought in a decent lager type of beer. In fact, it's got better beer than we have in Peru. The German influence was both farmers, but it was also, Bolivia was just a simple fact about Bolivia, no political comments on this, was a major destination for escaping Nazis after World War II. It's estimated there are about 1,000 Nazis that escaped and lived in Peru, Bolivia. Some were captured, some were not. And here's some of the food. You can see. Now, if you're on a gourmet tour, it doesn't look very nice, does it? But in fact, it's quite tasty. And I wanted to just tell you something about this food, yeah? On the bottom right, that's beef jerky, or it can be made from alpacas and llamas as well. And it's called charqui, where the English word jerky comes from. It comes from the indigenous languages. It's served in lots of places. To the left, fricassee is renowned as a soup to have for breakfast, especially after heavy nights drinking alcohol. It's very hot and spicy, and it's supposed to sort of lift you up, as it were. Middle top is pique macho, and that sounds, actually, it's not very, its description is not. It's beef, red onion, green peppers, tomatoes, French fries, mustard, mayonnaise, and ketchup. Wow, sounds like street food in Manchester. And over here, silpancho. That is a very typical dish. I eat that a lot. I like it. It's very peppery, and it's got onions, beef, parsley, tomatoes, eggs, and so on. But my favorite Bolivian food is the top left, which is called a salteña, which is, I can't buy them anywhere else but Bolivia. They do offer them in other countries in South America, but you can't, they're not the same. You have to try a salteña in Bolivia to say you've had a salteña. And the national drink, of course. Okay, the national drink is a spirit, eau de vie, called Singani. And Singani is very much the same as the process for grappa in Italy or pisco in Peru. And the way they serve it in Bolivia is mixed with ginger ale, ideally. But ginger ale out in the boondocks is very hard to get, so they just find any soft drink, any fizzy soda you can get, and a garnish of lime, and there you go. In fact, I could do with one right now, but I don't have one handy. Now I'm going to move on to a map of Bolivia. This will be very confusing to you, so don't worry about it too much. I think this is being recorded, and you can look at it at leisure afterwards. The yellow outlines are the countries. Is the country of Bolivia. To the northeast, you have Brazil. To the north, you have Peru. To the west, you have Chile. And to the southeast, you have Paraguay. And right down at the bottom, you have Argentina. And those lines represent the major birding routes that people take normally when they go on a Bolivia tour. When you're going on looking for birds somewhere in the world, although it'd be fantastic to explore, most of us don't have the time or the money to do so. So we tend to go where we know the birds are. And these are the routes. Now, the red lines is the major transect. We normally start in Santa Cruz and travel west to Lake Titicaca. The purple lines, you need to take a flight to Neuquén from Manu National Park, which I'll talk about later, Trinidad, which I'll talk about later. The Bolivian Chaco is a side trip. It's not part of the main route. The green lines are sort of like extensions for special birds, but I'll go into those further down the line. Let's look at birds now. I've talked a bit about the culture and the food. There's much more to talk about. Bolivia is a rich, rich country, but let's talk about the birds. That's an Andean avocet, and that's the habitat it lives in. Spectacular bird, all avocets are. This is a particularly good one and particularly hard to see. But now I really want to move on to the birds and look at numbers and yardsticks. Many of you who are listening to this presentation perhaps do not keep bird lists, are not interested in crunching numbers. Perhaps you're purist birders and just go out and enjoy the incredible diversity of birds, which is what I tend to do. I'm not a photographer. I'm a sound recordist, and I'm more interested in the behavior of birds than I am in anything else. But of course, my Peru list is dear to me, and I do keep a list. as I'm not a complete saint. I do keep a list, but you can see the problem we have these days in keeping a list is, I'm sorry, my computer keeps jumping slides. As you can see, there's different yardsticks and numbers. I mean, how do you calculate your list, your country list, your garden list, your reservoir list, your local patch list? Depends on which yardstick you use. This is an example. If you use the South American Classification Committee, which is the most stolid, most scientifically viable committee, which won't recognize a species of bird unless there is printed documentation and peer reviewed, you can see who's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 on that, and see the numbers. If you use the most popular eBird Clements, which is what most bird watchers use, you can see the numbers dance around and change. So looking at keeping lists, it depends what you use. But what is interesting is both lists. Bolivia comes in at number 5. Now, Bolivia comes in at number 5, and it has no seacoast. That is incredible. All the countries above it all have long shorelines. They have sea, they have pelagic birds, they have shearwaters, petrels, gulls, all those kinds of things. Bolivia does not. And you can see how high it ranks, considering that it really does have no sea. And that it gives you an idea of the diversity that the country holds. Peru doesn't have, I keep saying Peru because I'm living in Peru, I'm sorry. Bolivia only has 15 endemic birds, or maybe 16, depending on what you look at. That sounds, that's pretty poor. Look at the other countries. Brazil, 238, Peru, 1715. What is going on here? But even though Bolivia has only 15, it's got a ton more, 100 plus that are incredibly difficult to see in neighboring countries. That, they just sneak over the border into Argentina or sneak over the border into Brazil. And really, you have to go to Bolivia to see them. So the actual endemic number is a bit of a lie, because there are so many great birds you can see that are almost endemics, but not quite. Here's a list of the endemic birds and where to see them. Those are what at the moment are considered endemic birds, apart from the bottom 2 and the right-hand column, Inti tanager and Palcachupa catinga. South American Classification Committee does not. Clements eBird does call Palcachupa catinga a separate species. It's a swallowtail catinga lookalike. And it's endemic to an extremely small area of Bolivia. Unlike the swallowtails in Brazil, for half the year it disappears and no one knows where it goes. Inti tanager, a recently described species to science, is a vagrant in Peru, but its main breeding population is in Bolivia. If you want to see Inti tanager, you have to go to Bolivia, and more about him later. But the ones that I've asterisked in red on a regular birding trip with a tour leader, or if you're a competent solo birder, you should be able to see all those starred in red. The top 2, horned curassow, I've seen it. It's many, many years ago. It's in very rough terrain, and unfortunately is now inundated with cocaine producers and is not deemed to be too much of a safe area to go to. It's in the Manu National Park. And coppery thorntail, which is known from 2 specimens in northeast Bolivia, may be a hybrid, may be extinct. So let's take a look at some of these endemics. There's the horned curassow. pretty spectacular. Very shy. All the curassows throughout South America and Central America up to Mexico are highly prized as game meat. They're heavily hunted wherever you go by indigenous people, policemen with spare bullets, so on and so forth. It's a very shy and difficult bird to live. And to see it, you have to hike up terrain like that. That's the way I saw it when I was a younger man, hiking up these stony rivers and looking for it. To see it today, an expedition could probably be arranged, but it'd be quite arduous. Corporate thorntail, endangered or extinct. Who knows if it exists, if it ever did exist, if it's a bird at all. But there's a picture of it, stolen from Birds of the World. And that would be, from what we know, from where the specimens were taken, that would be the sort of habitat it would live in, which is riverine, lowland, Amazonian rainforest, which, as I mentioned earlier, is one of the most unexplored areas of Bolivia. Now, that little beauty, he's an endemic. Who wouldn't like to see a hummingbird like that? That's the old black-hooded sunbeam. And fortunately, it's quite common and quite widely distributed throughout the mid-Andes. Gets close to the Peruvian border, gets close to the Argentine border, but until now, he remains in Bolivia. He doesn't want to cross the frontier. And that's the sort of habitat he would live in. He would live in the scrubby, second growth, gardens, open areas, edge of humid forest, that kind of thing. Then, what can we say about Bolivia? It has, as we mentioned, a few endemics, but what country in the world has two large endemic macaws? Bolivia. It's incredible. It's got two big macaws that are only found in that country. Now, the blue-throated macaw is critically endangered. It was only discovered in the wild. It was known from bird collections, zoos, and so on. And Dr. Charles Mann followed the paper trail back from zoos in the United States. You know, where did this bird come from? Okay, this guy in La Paz. Go and see the guy in La Paz. Where'd you get this bird from that you sent to the museum? Oh, I've got a contact in Santa Cruz. Guy in Santa Cruz, oh, I know an indigenous group of people, blah, 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 and traced it back and actually found a wild population. And once a wild population was found, conservation measures were put in instantly, and large tracts of land where the last remaining macaws lived, and they're doing very, very well. And they're increasing in numbers. And if you go to Bolivia and Santa Cruz, where most people go, there's local ranches nearby catering for ecotourism, where you can go and easily see these large and wonderful creatures. And that, you can see, is the habitat they live in. It's open savanna with islands of trees, mostly dominated by palms. As you can see on the right, they have easily adapted to nest boxes, which is a great thing because it's a big competition for natural tree holes amongst arboreal mammals and other birds. And that is the other endemic macaw, which is also critically endangered. For me, probably the most spectacular macaw because of where it lives and its history. It's, again, been in trouble for many years because of collectors for zoos, etc. Fortunately, it now has a protected area. The NGO Armonia in Bolivia is actively protecting it, and you can actually go to the red-fronted macaw reserve, and there is the lodge below, and the birds nest in those cliffs right in front. They're cliff nesters. So that is a great place to stay, and all 100% of whatever the lodge makes goes to conserving the macaws. Bolivian antpitter, that's a more duller bird. It's my kind of bird, rather than those gaudy macaw things. These sneak around in the understory of the cloud forest, and they're pretty hard to see. This has recently become an endemic due to the split up of the Rufus antpitter complex. But it's quite common between Cochabamba and La Paz, and there are many sites you can go and look for it and be attentive to its voice and find one. And that's the sort of habitat it would live in. That's a pretty blurry photo, actually. But anyway, that's the habitat it lives in, a higher cloud forest. But you're not going to see it from a road. You've got to crawl into the vegetation and be with it inside. And another antpitter. Now, this is an interesting one. This is only known from maybe 5 or 6 small patches of woodland near the town of Riberalta, which you have to fly to. And it's a really localized endemic. It's vulnerable. Doesn't seem to be uncommon. Doesn't seem to be in danger. There's still enough forest for it, but its range is so small that we have to be a little bit worried about it. It's an easier to see antpitter. It readily comes into playback of its song outside the breeding season. And although it's a one bird, it could be a one bird trip to Rural to see that bird. I mean, you really have to be a South American specialist to fly and go and see that one bird. But some people like doing that kind of thing, doing quests. Nearby, there's some very good tropical savanna, which has some Brazilian things on it, including Chaco eagle and Rufus-sided pygmy tyrant. I enjoy going to see the masked antpitter. I really do. And I like the town of Riberalta because it's somewhere where no tourists ever go. You know, it's you're way off the tourist track, and it's fairly easy to get to with a flight from La Paz. And that's the very track that you walk down to see the antpitter. And you do not have to go off the track for this bird. You can just stand by and whistle its call, and it'll happily come out and show itself to you. Another endemic, which is really range restricted, is the Burleptis canistera. That is only found in one valley, not far from Lake Titicaca, at a place called Sorata. All natural habitat has gone. What it lived in before, we don't know. But all that's left are farmsteads with stands of eucalyptus trees. And you drive along the road until you see a big stick hanging nest in a eucalyptus tree. Get out the car and wait a bit, and you will see the Burleptis canistera. But it's only found in that one valley. But you combine it with seeing Lake Titicaca and the Titicaca Grebe. There's its habitat, as you can see, more anthropogenically alterated, with the Cordillera Real mountains in the background. Another endemic is the black-throated thistletail, only found in northern and central Bolivia. It lives in this high tree line, what we call elfin forest, which is quite high, 4,000 meters above sea level or more. But once you get into its habitat, relatively easy to see. And this is a bit of a pilgrimage to go and see the Bolivian spinetail. It's not on most birding itineraries, but it is a detour, but there is a back road which is good for other birds, and you can go and see it in this dry, deciduous forest. It's kind of like one of those birds that's really common. You just have to make the effort to go and drive there and get out of the car. Once you're there, you're going to see it. It's the pilgrimage that works. Now, this is an enigma. Unicolored thrush, endemic to Bolivia, only around the Beni lowlands, the Trinidad area, basically known from 2 or 3 specimens. It was known, it labeled in the museums that where they were collected. And it wasn't until ornithologist Dan Lane heard a thrush singing. He wasn't quite sure whether it was, because there are several thrushes that live in the gallery forest with it that sound fairly similar. He got a recording of it, played it back, and was the first person to see unicoloured thrush in the wild. The place is easily accessible. It's been overlooked for donkey's years. It's been unobtrusive there. Again, it's near Trinidad, and if you put the effort in and you go to Trinidad and you've got patience, you've got a chance of seeing it. Not the easiest of birds. That's what it lives in. And like most thrushes, I tried to see a song thrush last time I was in the UK, and God, that was hard. But flies very quickly, perches in a inconspicuous place, and normally shuts up when you've played its song. Bolivian brushfinch, widely distributed. Brushfinches are a group throughout the Andes, from Venezuela down to Bolivia, different species as you move down north-south, but they're fortunately very common because they're very pretty. And that's one you can see easily in Bolivia. And that's the sort of habitat it lives in, again, cloud forest, or yungas, as the Bolivians say. Yungas is a Quechua word which means cloud forest. And the Bolivian blackbird, not very spectacular, but it is quite common and lives in this kind of habitat. And it should be no problem to see if you go to Bolivia. And grey-bellied flowerpiercer, same thing, widely distributed, Middle Andes, almost gets into Peru. I've looked for it in Peru, but I haven't found it. And it lives in habitat like that, man-altered habitat, farms, fields, hedgerows, things like that. And then you have the Cochabamba mountain finch, much wanted bird, can be a bit elusive, but out of Cochabamba, which the name suggests, you can see it in the hills above Cochabamba. Very pretty bird indeed, and much wanted by many birders who go to Bolivia. And it lives in that kind of stuff, scrub polylepis. Polylepis is a type of tree that grows above tree line and harbors several species of birds which are only found in that particular species of tree or group of species of trees. And polylepis woodland is a relic woodland, and it has to be protected until we get enough forest left to consider these birds out of danger. I was pleased to see that a Peruvian conservationist who has planted over several million polylepis trees throughout Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, won Prince William's Earthshot Prize this year for being an ambassador of the planet, or whatever the phrases they use. So yes, polylepis trees, very important. There is a book. There wasn't. There was no book. For years, I had to go to Bolivia with no book. Had to use a combination of other books. There were no apps. There was no nothing. A lot of time you were sort of scratching your head and saying, what am I looking at here, until you got to know the birds. Really hard to find in the UK. It's available. The first edition was printed in Bolivia. I think there's a second edition that was printed in the US, but I don't know if anyone distributes it in the UK. It's a bit big. It's just about can be called a field guide. I think it's kind of book you'd just leave on the bus, yeah, rather than walking around with it. But it does have some decent illustrations and text, as you can see. It's quite well written. The text particularly is incredibly useful for the birder new in Bolivia, trying to find certain birds, and the maps are very good as well. And there you go, some of the many hummingbirds that exist in Bolivia. I go back to this map again, because now I'm going to take a look at those different areas, the ones with the yellow pins, the Bolivian Chaco, Santa Cruz, Cochabamba, Manu National Park, Apolo, Lake Titicaca, and so on. And let's see what they're all about. Lake Titicaca and Apolo. Lake Titicaca has a flightless grebe, and you can drive into the Machariapo Valley and see this Palcachupa cotinga. It's a ridiculous bird. When you're there in the breeding season, it's there. It's nesting in bushes barely 2 feet high off the ground. I walked down that track and just looked left and right. I was with a local guy, actually, a conservation guy, first time I've been there. And he said, "Haven't you seen one yet?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, just look in every bush." And in every bush, there was a cotinga nesting. And then they leave, and no one knows where they go. Now, could they be part of the same species as the Brazilian ones? Seems unlikely because of the huge difference between them, but genetic work, I think, needs to go on to find out. And in that same valley, you can see the recently described to science Inti tanager, which is nests, at the moment, we know it nests in one valley in the rainy season, which is November to October to May. It's common at that time of year if you make the effort to go to see that bird. Then it disperses, and again, we don't know where it goes. There are some isolated records from the Manu Road that Steve mentioned earlier, but they must be vagrants. But we really don't know where their wintering grounds are. This bird is Inti tanager. Inti is the Quechua word for sun, because it's sun-colored, and its scientific name reflects it as well, Heliothraupas, sun tanager, and it's named for famous ornithologist John O'Neill, now retired, ex of Louisiana State University. And that's where it lives. Let's have a look at some birding routes. Santa Cruz savannas. What can you see when you go to the Santa Cruz savannas? Savannas. Okay, there you go. Islands of trees, which have the blue-throated macaws in them, and lots of other things. You can see loads of some Jesuit missions, which are quite interesting. Just get away from the birds for a second to diversify the talk a little bit. That pussycat, the third largest cat in the world, is not uncommon at all, especially on river trips. If you go down the river, you may see a jaguar. And the Bolivian dolphin, which is endemic to Bolivia. The river system it lives on, there is a large rapid on the way to Brazil as the waters flow towards Brazil, which is a population barrier. So this population of river dolphins, obviously related to the pink river dolphin, have been isolated, and genetic data shows that they're a Bolivian endemic. Again, on a boat trip, you can see those. Now, let's have a look at the Bolivian Chaco. Here's a gaucho, a Bolivian cowboy. Now, just behind me, I took that photo. Just behind me are standing my tour group. And this guy rides up, and they all call it snapping photos. This is 6:30 in the morning, and he's come in with his leather canteen because the farm he's visiting produces moonshine, and he needs his morning drink before he goes out to round up his cattle in the thorny bush. You can see those chaps he has to protect him from the vegetation. But my God, I tried that stuff. He must go out like pretty tipsy every morning to round up his cattle. That's more open areas of the Chaco with those pseudo bombax trees with the big trunk. They're designed for storing water to get through dry spells. And if you're lucky, you might see a Chaco eagle, which is a much wanted bird, not easy to see at all. And the endemic Chaco peccary. Well, it's endemic to the Chaco, but the Chaco is shared, of course, with a bit of Argentina and Paraguay. But this wild boar peccary is endemic to those forests. No Mercado National Park. It's probably the wildest place I've been to in South America. Extremely difficult to get to. It was in the past. It was like a 2.5-hour flight on a 4-seater plane to an airstrip in the middle of nowhere, where there were 2 places you could stay. During the reign of President Evo Morales, no money was given to conservation or upkeep of national parks. The 2 lodges fell into total disrepair, and now there is nowhere to stay there. And I don't think any eco-tourists go there these days. You could probably do it overland on a multi-day trip. And that's where we used to stay at Florida Oro Lodge. Now, apparently, the roof's caved in and it's not possible. But you can see the river Guaporé just beyond the houses. The other bank is Brazil. So this river is the boundary between Brazil and Bolivia. And you could see that critter there. Now, he's got long legs. It's a maned wolf, but it's not really a wolf. It's not related to anything. It's in its own genus. It's not a coyote. It's not a fox. It's not a wolf. It's a maned wolf, but it's got its own genus. And you can see those fairly easily on the open savannas, especially at dusk or going spotlighting at night. It's got those long legs because apart from eating large insects and small rodents, it actually eats fruit. And some of the fruit are quite high up on the tree. So it's evolved to have long legs to reach those fruits that other ground-dwelling creatures can't get at. And you might see a black-girdled barber, which of course occurs in Brazil, Rio Cristalino, but no Mercado Park shares the same avifauna with, or some of the same avifauna with Rio Cristalino. Back on the main road, driving up to from the east to west, we get to Santa Cruz to Cochabamba Road, and you can see Bolivian earth creeper, which wasn't endemic until recently. It's been found in northern Argentina, a small population. Many birds to see on that route. You can stay at, just down in the bottom there, if you look carefully, you'll see some houses. That is the Los Volcanes Lodge. Fantastic place to stay, not just because of the birds, but look at that scenery. Absolutely astounding. It's a must on the transect up to Cochabamba. After Cochabamba, on the way to Coroico, you can stop at Lake Oruro, which often has 3 species of flamingos, lots of waterfowl and so on. Fortunately, due to climate change and the need for water for the nearby cities and crop irrigation, the lake is shrinking year by year. And on the way, you get to see some, a few mountains here and there and a bit of snow. Fortunately, the rate of glacier retreat in the Andes is the highest in the world. And I know mountains that look like that. Well, I'm going back a long way. I'm going back 30 years plus. It's now just black ice, no snow, no ice, nothing. Yeah, sorry, just black rock, which is quite startling when I go back through my old slides and see the slides I took all those years ago. And I'm standing there looking at the mountain. It's just black rock. It's really sad. And the cloud forest, the Yungas. Now, this is the so-called death road. So-called because of all the deaths that occur along it. This used to be the main road from La Paz down into the lowlands to Coroico. And it was traveled by huge lorries, heavily loaded. And it's only one way with a few small passing places. And so many a truck just tippled over the edge. And so it got its name, the Death Road. Fortunately, they've built a new paved road, 2-lane, on the other side of the valley. And now this road has become quiet and peaceful. And it's great for birding. And you might see a scimitar-winged piha or all kinds of antpitters and things. The only thing you have to watch out for is it's used as a downhill for mountain bikers. So suddenly you're quietly birding on a corner and a flock of mountain bikers run you down. You have to watch out for that. But very little traffic and great birding. And if you're lucky, you might see a spectacled bear. This must be one of Paddington's relatives because Paddington came from deepest, darkest Peru, and it's the only bear in South America. I have seen them along that road now. It's got quieter. Lake Titicaca. Wow. Huge lake, as we mentioned earlier. There are a group of indigenous people called the Uros who live on these artificial islands of reeds they build and actually live a floating lifestyle with schools, shops, and everything, heavily visited by tourists. And there are many islands on the lake, like Takili Island, not particularly diverse for birds, but if I was to go to Bolivia and I was going to Lake Titicaca anyway to see the grebe, I'd take a day out to go to one of the islands, like the Island of the Sun, the Island of the Moon, something like that. There's archaeological sites on there. The sunsets are spectacular, and it's on the beaten track. And there's our friend the grebe again. There used to be 3 flightless grebes in South America. Now there's only 2. The Colombian flightless grebe sadly left us in the early part of the 20th century due to drainage because it lived in wetlands around the main capital, Bogota. We have the Titicaca grebe, and then in central Peru on Junin, we have the Junin grebe. Unisalt flats. Now, this is not really visited by birders. I've been there. It's interesting birding. There's nothing there you can't see in Argentina or Chile, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime destination for the scenery. You can see vicuñas there. You can see guanacos. Those are the 2 Andean cameloids that live wild. The alpaca and the llama are domestic derivatives of those 2 species. And those are salt flats. They're bigger than anything in the United States, where all those spaceships land and so on. They have high deposits of lithium, which Chinese and everyone else wants to extract, but Bolivia's being smart and saying we're going to learn to get it out ourselves and not farm it off to China. And it's surreal. It really is. At certain times of year, there's about 1 inch of water. It's ice underneath. Not ice, it's salt underneath. And you get these just surreal vistas and images. And you get loads of flamingos. James's flamingo, which is probably, of all the world's flamingos, the hardest to see, is just common there. You can walk right up to them. I mean, you can almost touch them. And they're just honking and displaying and getting ready for breeding. It's amazing. And you have lakes like that near the salt flats, which could have all 3 species of Andean flamingo. In fact, I can see at least 2 in that one. And spectacular scenery. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I hope I didn't go on too long. Visit Bolivia if you can. And yeah, over to you. And if you've got any questions, let me know.
Thank you very much indeed, Barry. That was wonderful. There will be some questions. I'd like to invite anybody to shout out now and take this golden opportunity to ask our expert this evening about Bolivia. Over to the audience. I think we're all stunned into silence just for the moment, Barry. Just give us a moment or two.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
It was just so gripping.
If there's no questions and you think of something later, I'm sure that one of you can give them my email address or whatever, and I'm very happy to answer questions.
Barry, how many times have you seen the Inti Tanager now?
I have only seen the Inti Tanager once, and that was on the Manu Road, and that was the famous Wings tour incident, and the aftermath was that with Dan Lane we went down and refound it a few years later. I've been to the Machareapo Valley just before the pandemic, and we're a bit early, and there was a river that got flooded, and our driver said, if we don't get across this river now, we'll never get back. So I only had like half an hour looking for the bird, not enough time, didn't see it. But I promise you, if you do go at the right time of year, you will see it. But you've seen it, have you not?
Sadly, Barry, when Dan and Gary saw it, I was stood behind them facing the other way. And wasn't that the first time it was ever seen for science?
Well, I was there, and I was at the back and missed it as well.
But you went back a few years later because you lived there and got it.
Well, no, Dan had a few weeks left and decided he'd come up to Cusco, and with Hugh Lloyd, who was a Welshman, and myself, we went to, I said, we'll get on our pickup truck and look for it. And we were expecting a sort of, a 7-day odyssey trying to find this bloody thing, which is out of its range and a vagrant and all the rest of it. And we got out of my pickup truck in the morning, and Dan said, I'm going down the road. And Hugh said, I'll go with you. And I said, well, I'll go up the road. We had walkie-talkies, yeah? I literally got around the bend 10 minutes, and I was playing the song of this bird, and it popped up on top of a bush right in front of me. I radioed the others. They came up. They all saw it.
Wow. So did someone get it, record it the time when I was there?
Yeah, the story behind that is quite interesting. When you were there in the evening, Gary Rosenberg was revising his recordings for the day. And he said to me, what's that in the background that sounds like a masked yellowthroat? I said, well, there are no masked yellowthroats. He said, I know that. That's why I'm asking you. What is it? And I said, I don't know. So when Gary got home, he used software to amplify and clean up the sound. And the next year on the exactly same Wings tour, he used this amplified sound, and the bird responded and started singing. So he got even better recordings. With that recording, Dan, Hugh, and I went down and looked for it.
Wow.
So you were
Amazing.
there, but you didn't get
just
it.
looking the wrong way. Typical. Yeah. Amazing though. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. Barry, I've heard about a park called Madidi. Forgive me if you mentioned it and I missed it. Is that one that's on your radar? Madidi. I might have mispronounced.
I didn't mention it. I did mention it, but not as Madidi. It's the place where the Inti Tanager is, and that we're just talking about with Steve. It's right on the edge of the Madidi National Park, and that's out of Riber Alta. The main part of it, people go to a town called Riber Alta, but I didn't mention it because it's not a major birding destination, and it has all the similar species you can see in other countries.
Okay, yes. Now, I'd heard it mainly from a general conservation point of view as being quite successful. And I wanted to go on to ask you what's conservation like in Bolivia at the moment? Is it active and proactive in terms of habitat management and on a big
Yes,
scale?
it is. I really don't know how much funding they're getting right now, but the NGO Armonia has done marvelous work over the years, and are actively buying land, protecting forest,
Yep.
including on the boundaries of the Medidi Park area, the Macoy areas,
Yeah.
and sponsoring a lot of research and looking at conservation initiatives. So yes, it's quite active.
Good. I'm very pleased. And is BirdLife International involved?
Yes,
Good.
BirdLife International are partners with Armonia.
Great. That's good to hear. Very reassuring. I don't know, has Bolivia received any direct funding from any of the British Bird Fair events?
I think it did. There was, just as the pandemic hit, the Neotropical Bird Club was planning a donors trip to Bolivia, with all the profits going to Bolivia, but sadly it had to be cancelled because of the pandemic.
Oh, that's a shame. Thank you,
Barry. Yeah,
yes,
sorry. Do birders, well, people in general, have any major issues with the altitude in Bolivia?
Yes, of course. As you do going up to the Andes from sea level. That's why it's recommended that anyone who does a bird tour starts in the lowlands in Santa Cruz rather than the highlands the other way. So what you're doing is you start in Santa Cruz, which is what, 800 meters above sea level, and then you slowly work your way up. You bird the lowlands, doing those flights to outlying areas, which is also lowlands. And then you slowly work your way up the road to Cochabamba, increasing altitude a little bit each night, staying at places until by the time you get up to La Paz, you're completely acclimatized.
How high is La Paz?
La Paz is about 4,000 meters at the airport, maybe a bit more, 4,200.
And do you go much higher than that on the trip?
No, that's it. La Paz is the top. Everything else is below that, including Lake Titicaca, which is 3,800.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. We've had a question, Barry, about eucalyptus, whether there's much of an effort to reduce the amount of eucalyptus in favor of indigenous trees.
To eliminate eucalyptus, no. To propagate native trees, yes. But it goes hand in hand with eucalyptus. And why does it do that? Because we've learned from experience that people below the poverty line have to cook on wood.
Yeah.
They need wood. Okay. So to stop them cutting down any trees you might have planted or that exist, the indigenous trees, what some NGOs are doing is planting eucalyptus trees and saying to local communities, that's your firewood. We're giving you that. Use that firewood, but protect this native forest. And it seems to be working.
Good. Yeah, that sounds very...
I'm a great... I dislike eucalyptus trees immensely. Maybe they're okay in Australia, but I don't want them here in the Andes. But unfortunately, they're a necessary evil because they're the only tree that left in the Andes that has a nice straight trunk, which can be used for roofing beams on houses and construction and so on.
Thank you. It does sound a pragmatic solution to what must be a serious problem. Any other questions for Barry this evening?
There's one in the chat that says, good to know about the conservation efforts, but what about Lake Titicaca and the water for the farmers and population?
Yeah, Lake Titicaca is a basin, and most of the water drains into it from higher land. So what water does drain into it is diverted before it gets to the lake for agriculture. It has been for thousands of years. So the water levels there are not changing significantly. The major threats to the lake is raw sewage from towns on the edge like Puno, which is a big town. The UK has been involved. I cannot remember the source. It's on a consultancy basis, but to implement a waste treatment plant so that the grey water is used for agriculture and only clean water goes into the lake. But I'd have to dig deeper and find out more about that.
Barry, are you aware that numbers of visiting sort of bird watchers and other eco-tourists has gone back up to pre-COVID level?
Yes, after the huge plummet, I'm working in tourism and living in a tourist town, I'm very sensitive to this. What has happened is pre-COVID, Bolivia had perhaps just under 1 million visitors each year. That's went down to almost zero. And as we slowly rise up post-pandemic, I think last year it was something like 200,000, quite a big change. In Peru, 4.5 million, we're down to about 1 million. So it's slowly creeping up. Now, tourism is booming, of course, in popular destinations such as the Mediterranean. What I've discovered is that if you look at North America, they're looking a lot at short haul holidays. So for them, it's the Caribbean. South America is not that far away for them. Hawaii, places like that. And Europeans, it's the Caribbean, it's Eastern Europe, it's North Africa, if there is a safe place to go in North Africa these days. So whether there used to be a lot of long haul flights, London, La Paz, Lima, so on and so forth, people are not flying those for two reasons. The economy, people have to tighten their belts these days. Secondly, people are becoming more conscious of their carbon footprint. And three, there's a lot of great destinations closer to home, which are cheaper.
Yeah. Well, I hope the numbers of the are sustained, though. You know, it must be a huge benefit for conservation agencies there. So fingers crossed that, yeah, your numbers of tourists keep up. Are there any other questions for Barry?
There's no questions. There was a couple of comments. Sue said, really interesting and informative talk. Thank you. And Trevor said he took a flight from Lima to Brazil, which showed the pure expanse of virgin forest in Bolivia, which was quite amazing. I remember something similar actually when I flew into Lima. Just looking down and seeing trees was just amazing. And that was 20 years ago now. So.
Well, that is, Gary, that is one of the major problems we have here. Although there are conservation efforts, if we're talking about the Amazon rainforest and what we call Chiquitiano forest in Bolivia, we have a major problem with a religious group. I don't want to get into religion or politics or anything like that, but Mennonites who have been traditionally farmers in particular the Santa Cruz area, Brazil, and that area are firing up so much forest deforest to produce crops. It's really disturbing the amount of fire deforestation during the dry season, and these chaps have now fixed their eyes on central Peru and cutting down vast swathes of pristine rainforest in the central Amazon of Peru. They have their arguments, of course. It's not just religious. They have their arguments about economy and so on and so forth. Fortunately, it being South America and a brown paper envelope with money to the right minister can get you any permission you want. It's very hard to control them, and I'm seriously concerned about that. Mostly for the production of soya, not for human consumption, but as fodder for animals, which are then slaughtered for human consumption.
Well, that is a sad note to end on. It doesn't surprise me in a way, Barry, and it was certainly highlighted in one of the recent Planet Earth programs, Planet Earth 3, that being one of the major problems, not just in South America. So it's very sobering and worrying. Well, it's my happy job to say thank you to you, Barry, on behalf of everybody on screen, as it were, this evening. It's been enjoying your wonderful talk. You said it was quite a long way from where you're sitting giving this talk to Bolivia, 4 hours. It's a hell of a lot longer further away for us, of course. And it's the sort of country that most of us can just dream about, may never visit. Yet we feel it's really important that Bolivia and its wildlife is there for the future. You've given us a window into what is known to be the most biodiverse region on the planet, the tropical Andes, for everything, plants, birds, pretty well any group you care to mention. And you've given us a great taster for that by nicely introducing the landscape, the people and the culture to begin with. That was a lovely introduction for those of us like me that really don't know very much about Bolivia. That set the scene really nicely. And then it was great to have the endemics quite rightly highlighted. So thank you for going through all of those and giving us the up-to-date situation. And then you took us through the different parts of Bolivia very nicely indeed, from lowlands to uplands, and showed us how they might be incorporated into a tour, which became increasingly tempting as your talk went on. Your slides did ample justice to your commentary. They really were so informative and brought your commentary to life even more. Thank you very much for those. But just throughout, your pure insight, which comes from your vast experience of South America generally, and from having visited Bolivia, both for pleasure and as a guide, which shone through. But that wouldn't have perhaps been enough without your individual manner. And it just reminded me so much of the program I used to love so much when I was younger, the ZooQuest programs with David Attenborough. You had that very gentle introduction to the places, the landscapes and the wildlife in general, and then the fascinating insights and detail on particular species. And for us listening tonight, that didn't just include the birds, but it was lovely to hear and see pictures of jaguar and river dolphins. Thank you very much. That it just brought it home to us how superbly rich Bolivia really is, and how much it desperately needs to be safeguarded for the future. So for all those reasons, the talk was outstanding, and we thank you very much indeed. It was a real privilege to hear from an expert such as yourself this evening. I think for anybody, whether you be a real twitcher, you got your money's worth, whether you, like me, perhaps have got a more general interest, you certainly got your money's worth. And I'm sure you'd have tempted many listening tonight to put it on their bucket list of places to visit. And I hope many will, to help safeguard the wildlife and the people that live with that wildlife for the future. It's so important that it is recognised as being vital to the country. So thank you from us all. And the chat beforehand was great fun. Thank you for engaging with us in such a convivial and relaxed way. And we look forward perhaps a third talk in the future. I'm sure you've got lots more up your sleeve. And
I look forward to revisiting North Wales the next time I get back to the UK.
Well, please get in touch, Barry, and we will lay down the red carpet for you and show us all we've got. Very happily so. Thank you again.